Hello, everyone. I'm really delighted to be here.
Great. And how have you been finding lockdown?
Well, it's a mixed bag, isn't it? I think there's a bit of me that is enjoying being freed from any kind of social obligations for a while. But that bit of me is probably less prominent now because I do feel just a bit bored, and I'm missing seeing some of my friends. My PhD student, Maggie Laurie, who is brilliant, passed her Viva the other day, and I just really really want to take her out for a drink.
Yeah.
And I can't do it. So
and is it affecting your work in any other way, or?
I work with quite a big team, and I just sort of worry about them a bit because I can't see them every day, or at least, you know, once in the week. So I'm just really aware that all of the people I work with are responding to it in different ways and experiencing different things. Some people have moved home, some people are living with flatmates, some people are living alone, some people's work is carrying on kind of the same, some people's work has been derailed. And it's hard giving them all the support that they need because everyone is having such a unique experience, you know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's people keep using the word unprecedented for a reason. It's become a cliche, hasn't it? So just to anyone who's joined, if you have any questions, you can submit those on Facebook, or if you're on Zoom, using the question and answer feature as well. And we'll try to get through as many questions as we can at the end. And I'm aware we were a little bit slow to join Facebook. So again, just to remind those of you who are on Facebook, we do have a dedicated coronavirus hub where we've developed some content based on what the community told us were their top priorities. But now I think I'll move to formally introducing you, Sue, now that we've got some people engaged on Facebook. So Dr. Sue Fletcher-Watson is a developmental psychologist, and she's the director of the Solace and Mind Room Centre. She's an expert in co-design and evaluation of technologies for autistic people and how technology can be used to help autistic people thrive. Right now, she's juggling research and homeschool, but to some degree is enjoying the release from obligations which have been brought by the lockdown. So we'll just introduce with your presentation. We've got 3 questions which we'd like to ask you around how we use technology at home, and we're starting, I guess, with what we already know. So what do we already know?
Yeah, it's like I can read your mind, James. Look at this on my slide. Sure. So yeah, what do we already know about autism and technology? So it's maybe a bit of a cliche that lots of autistic people kind of enjoy using technology and find it a really positive kind of environment in which to spend time, as it were. But I think the research supports that as well. It's not just a kind of stereotype. There's evidence that autistic people are early adopters of technology, that they often use technology across multiple settings. So they might be preferring to use technology in a school environment for learning, but also spending a lot of leisure time using technology as well. But at the same time, like, you know, it's worth just reminding ourselves that not every autistic person is some kind of like coding genius or hacker or whatever. There are technologies that you might call therapeutic, in the sense of technologies that are meant to support autistic people to thrive. But we know from our own research, we've done kind of online surveys and other kind of techniques, that the most commonly used technologies are not autism specific, right? So most autistic people of all ages are using the same technologies that are the most popular in general, you know, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and, you know, going on Wikipedia and searching for things on Google and so on. It's not all sort of autism specific technology, and we need to remember that, because I think a lot of the research is focused on sort of bespoke technologies for autistic people, and while there's a place for those, that's not necessarily the everyday experience of the average autistic person. In terms of the benefits, So there is research on the direct benefit of specific technologies, but that tends to be relatively rare and focused on technologies that were created by academics and not on these kind of everyday technologies. When we ask people like parents of autistic children and educators, they do report benefits, but they also have concerns around things like screen time, and we'll return to that later. In particular, we know that many of the benefits of technology that are indirect. So it's not about just, so an educational technology, for example, that might be teaching new vocabulary. It's not just about the new vocabulary that's learned, it's also about the enjoyment that the child seems to show while they're using it. The level of engagement might be higher than through other kind of non-digital learning methods. So a lot of those benefits are really indirect benefits to do with motivation, engagement, and so on. There's much less research into how autistic adults use technology. And that's something I'll maybe return to later on, or we can talk about in the questions. So, oh, and yeah, while we're talking about these kind of indirect benefits, I've just got some quotes here from an interview study I did with some parents of autistic children, highlighting this, I think, and showing how technology can provide a basis for kind of friendships, things to talk about, things that make people happy. And that's, you know, that's a really important outcome. I briefly wanted to mention the quality of the science, which is not great. So the evidence base is kind of really mixed quality. There's lots of studies looking at sort of benefits of technology that don't actually have a control group, a comparison group. And so it's hard to know how kind of rigorous those findings are. There's also a lack of solid kind of theoretical explanations of why autistic people would find technology really appealing. And we can make guesses about that based on, you know, the predictability of the environment, for example, but we don't really have a strong theoretical account. One of the reasons for this is that the tech world, the commercial world, moves so fast compared to the research world, releasing new updates and things like that all the time, whereas doing a really well-designed study, getting funding for it, completing it, publishing it could take, you know, 5 years. And in that time, like, someone's invented the iPad and your research isn't relevant anymore. But there are efforts being made, and I just wanted to briefly plug, hang on if I can get my slides to work, Beta, which is a website that myself and some colleagues have made, which is designed to provide autistic people, parents of autistic children, and practitioners with tools for selecting between different technologies, because we can be overwhelmed by what's out there. And the user checklists on this website help people make decisions about whether a technology is going to be reliable, like not buggy or glitchy or something, whether it's going to be engaging for people, but also whether it's going to be effective in terms of meeting your goals. And we make recommendations of where you can find the types of evidence that might help make an informed choice. I think that can be valuable, especially if you're considering investing in a new piece of technology, like a communication device, for example. So that's what we know about technology already.
Great, that's really, really helpful. And so I guess some of the take homes there are that not all, there's an assumption here that all autistic people love technology, but not all people do. But as a group, they're very much early adopters, and it's not just about autism specific tech. There's this general use of tech, which is can be very, very empowering for people as well. But we don't know a lot yet from a scientific perspective. But that website looks really, really, really useful. So in terms of tech, I guess that leads us on nicely to the next question, which is what can tech do for the question that families or autistic people quite often ask is, what can tech do for me? So how do you see that?
Yeah, so I've just brought up some kind of suggestions of how technology is being used in general, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how that might be particularly relevant right now in this kind of funny situation that we're all in. So a big use of technology is about communication support, from the level of, you know, the kind of non-speaking autistic person who's maybe using something like Proloquo to Go, which is a communication app on an iPad as a kind of alternative communication method to speech. but also up to, you know, autistic people who are using Twitter or Facebook or other kind of social media as a way of engaging with people, perhaps because that allows a bit more processing time, or because written communication, you know, there's fewer different cues to process. So if I write something sarcastic in a tweet, I'll write like in brackets sarcastic, or like do a little sarcastic GIF or something, because I can't, you know, I haven't got the tone of voice to make that clear to people. And I think for autistic people, anecdotally, that can be really, really useful. You know, it makes the true meaning or the hidden meanings more explicit than, you know, face-to-face communication sometimes is. The other thing, though, while we're talking about communication, is that, you know, technology is something to talk about as well as something to talk with or to talk to. So, like the quotes on the previous slide, you know, kids in the playground talking about Minecraft or Fortnite or, you know, whatever kind of game is currently the most popular one. That's also a really valuable thing. This is important social currency, especially for young people growing up. Continuing on that theme, I think technology provides an environment for kind of building friendships, and in particular for building friendships that aren't supervised by adults. And even though we worry a lot about the lack of supervision that young people have in technology, at the same time, that is an important part of becoming more independent, is having unsupervised time with peer groups. And of course, technology gives people, especially if they feel a bit isolated or a bit different from, you know, maybe the other kids in their class or from their neighbours or their work colleagues, an opportunity to find people who are like them, who share their interests or have similar experiences to them. I think it's important to remember that technology can be great for relaxation and just for bringing joy into your life. Particularly when we're thinking about children, we often think about technology like it has to be some sort of educational experience. But actually, just chilling out is really important. Having a release from other demands on your time, on your day, is really important. And that might mean watching the same YouTube clip over and over again, and that is okay. Right? We need to not judge that as like a bad use of technology compared to something else. Of course, there's lots of uses of technology within a kind of more traditional learning environment, sort of towards educational goals, and that's, you know, that's still a valuable use of it. I think maybe one of the reasons for that is that technology provides a lot of structure to the learning, which can be very valuable, and is also a really motivating environment in which to learn. And of course, by delivering things through, you know, say a website as opposed to a book, you have the opportunity for not just the written word, but also for kind of images and audio. And that can be really helpful in terms of giving people multiple ways to access information, to reinforce understanding, to not be so reliant on just what's written down, particularly, of course, if they maybe have dyslexia or problems with reading in addition. And then the last thing, of course, particularly as people, you know, move into adolescence and secondary school, and for adults, technology can be a great way to try and organize stuff. You know, using calendars and list apps and mind mapping technology and that kind of thing can be a really great way to get on top of, you know, anything that you need to do, whether it's, you know, chores that need done at home or something to do with work or managing your school timetable when you're at secondary school. So in terms of what those things look like right now in this kind of lockdown situation, when it comes to communication, I think technology gives us a chance to keep in touch with people, but on our own terms. We can choose the timing of the communication that we have with people. We can choose the medium, whether it's a video call or a phone call or a text conversation. I think that's really, really valuable. It makes our kind of social interactions perhaps more predictable, and we can choose when and where we want to have that kind of engagement with other people. When it comes to kind of that joy and relaxation thing, technology gives us a chance to follow our passions, to really get involved in something that we care about. And for anyone who's homeschooling, I would really strongly recommend trying to build some of that learning around those passions, which is something that the school classroom might be really struggle to do with lots of kids in the class, but that you might be able to do at home with your 1 or 2 children much more easily. I think technology is really useful as a communication support for people who are maybe have delayed language learning. And one of the things that we can do at the moment is offer more consistent scaffolding to communication, so that the same words are being used in the same way, the same technologies are being used in the same way to support communication. One of the things that the research shows is that if you use the communication technology yourself as a parent, that can be really important for modeling what the child is doing. And again, that's maybe hard to achieve in a school or in a nursery setting, but might be easier to achieve at home where you don't have lots of people in the room. I think technology gives kids a chance to learn at their own pace. And one of the things that we should be remembering to value is the skills that we develop just from using tech to do anything. So just like we value reading, whether you're reading a book or the back of a cereal packet, we should be valuing technology skills, whether you're, researching a kind of GCSE project on the internet or, browsing clips of Peppa Pig on YouTube. These are still important skills that will be valuable to your child or whoever for a long time. Technology, I think, gives us time to be alone and apart from the other people in our house. I think that's good for our mental health. And it gives us some room to kind of experiment. Particularly right now, this is a chance to maybe try something new. Again, because, it's just up to you, your children or your flatmates or your partner. And this could be a great environment to kind of download something you've not tried before and see if it works for you. And I'm running over on time, so I will stop there.
Thank you, that sounds really, really useful. I think it's a great example of the broad range of ways that technology can help people, from building relationships, just do something to do that's fun, to support learning, to structure communication, and just as something to do in your personal time to get some personal space. One of the things that families, and particularly parents, are really concerned about are risks around using technology. So I wonder if you could speak to that next.
I can, James. Yeah, I mean, this is a worry, and there's been some, pretty awful research published on this topic as well, as I know you're aware. So the first thing I think to say is that the concept of screen time is basically a myth. And if I never heard that word again, I would be absolutely delighted. I think going back to reading as a kind of comparison, we never talk about paper time, right? We never worry about the quantity of time that young people spend or that any of us spend with paper. Instead, we might be concerned if someone we felt was reading material that wasn't age appropriate for them, or that wasn't, let's say they had some sort of reading goal, we would want to make sure that they were being kind of stretched appropriately, perhaps. But we would never kind of add up the amount of time that someone spent looking at paper and think that that was a real thing. And we should really adopt the same approach to screen time. It's just not a thing. Instead, I think what's important about the way that kids use technology, whether it's screen-based or not, is what they're doing with it and whether it's valuable and interesting and age appropriate for them. And I'll talk about that a bit more. Another myth, which is a new myth, is the idea that there might be some sort of causal relationship between technology and autism. And this is just profoundly untrue. I have to try and maintain some professional language while I'm talking about this because it makes me really angry. But basically, I won't go into the detail, but I just want to reassure anyone who's listening, but there's literally zero reason to believe that any kind of time spent using digital resources of any kind would somehow contribute to being autistic, right? People are just autistic or they're not, and that's that. There are some real risks, right? So I think technology provides us with this constant flow of information and alerts and things that ping and things that buzz into your day. If you're looking at it late at night and you read a kind of anxiety producing headline, that is not necessarily going to be great for going to sleep. And I think another risk is people just not having good digital skills. And that could be everything from coming up with a really good password to protect their bank account online, to knowing how many times it's okay to text someone when they haven't replied, you know, that kind of thing, that sort of digital etiquette. So I think we do need to be aware of how we ourselves are using technology, and if we're parents, of how our children are using technology, but perhaps not in the ways that are more commonly emphasized in the media. In terms of solving these risks, I think make sure you understand the settings options on the technology that you have, on the device as a whole, and on any particular apps or websites you're using, like you know, social media like Facebook, or you know, your text message settings, your email settings. Think about what alerts you really need and what alerts you don't. Do you want it to make a noise? Do you want it to come up with a little red badge that tells you how many emails you've got? Is that helpful to you, or is that unhelpful? And really explore those settings options, because they often allow you to have a lot more control, and you don't need to do just what the default says. Think about, with younger people and with yourself, teaching yourself or developing your skills in terms of security and safety online, in terms of passwords, in terms of privacy settings, and so on. And it might be worth thinking, particularly perhaps for kind of teenagers and young adults, about what sort of appropriate digital etiquette might be. You know, what time of day it's okay to call people, you know, yeah, as I said earlier, how many text messages it's okay to send in a row when you haven't had a reply, that kind of thing. And there aren't hard and fast rules on this, of course, but it's an interesting conversation to have with someone, especially if they're becoming more independent in their use of technology at the moment. I think this is my last slide. So I think a useful way to think about technology is in terms of a kind of healthy digital diet, you know. So for parents, I would be asking not how much time your child is spending using technology, but how they are using it, what they're using it for. And I would find out about that by trying to kind of get involved. You know, some of the best stories I've heard about technology are parents who like make a Minecraft account and go into Minecraft and end up building like a huge castle with their child in Minecraft or something. If you're thinking about yourself as an autistic person, I think taking some time at the moment to think about how the technology you use is making you feel. Is it making you more or less anxious? Is it helping you to connect with people? Are the connections that you're making positive connections? And I just wanted to remind people as well that escapism is okay, and you don't need to feel guilty about playing Animal Crossing for 2 hours in the evening. Like, if that's making you have a nice evening, go for it. That's great. I think everyone could think about the time of day at which they access different kinds of technology, and whether they really need like a stream of BBC News headlines going into their eyeballs at 10:30 in the evening. The quality of the technologies that you're choosing and what you want to get out of it, and making it kind of educated choices for yourself or for your family around those kinds of topics. So that's the end. Really, I can just leave this conclusion slide up if that's helpful. I guess the top point is the most important one. I think technology can do lots of good things for you.
Great, thank you very much, Sue. That was really fantastic, and I think that point at the end there about having a healthy digital diet is good advice for anyone, really, isn't it? Just to let people know who are watching the webinar, the slides are available at our website if you're interested, or if you felt like you missed something and you want to go back, you can easily access them there. Massive thank you to you, Sue, for that presentation. If you don't mind now, we'll head over to some questions. I guess one of the questions that we've got here is from someone who is they're concerned that some people, they get obsessed with certain games or social media, that then impacts their ability to do anything else. How do you see this as a potential risk, and how someone can manage that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to be careful about words like obsession, right? Because that's automatically very loaded with kind of value judgments. I think it's important to understand why a particular individual is using technology in the way that they are. So if someone is really looking for social relationships and friendships, and finds that using social media or Facebook is a great way to achieve those, then limiting that could be really destructive for them. So I think the key thing is to have a conversation about what that young person is getting out of the use of technology, and to just have an ongoing dialogue about how that is kind of serving their needs, rather than focusing on, it's too much time on Facebook, or it's or default assuming that some sort of face-to-face interaction is better than a Facebook interaction, because for that individual, the Facebook interaction could be much, much better and much more constructive.
Yeah, no, that's really useful. So we have a question in from someone who's they're interested in what, you touched on earlier that some children and adults who are autistic really love technology and find it useful, but some people don't. And in some cases, some people can be quite resistant to new technology, and they don't quite have that confidence. Do you have any ideas around how parents or people supporting that person could help to build that confidence?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've never had that question before. So, I mean, I suppose it's about just finding the right technology. So the digital space is so big and varied, right? The last point on my conclusion slide was that this is somewhere that we can have an adventure. And so there probably is a technology out there for everyone, and it's just thinking about what would serve that person's interests best, what would be best for their capabilities in terms of, basic sort of navigation. So if they're not super confident at typing, for example, that anything that involves a lot of written words is maybe not going to be great, but something like Instagram, where it's about taking a picture and sharing your perceptions of something via an image, might be much better. And then also thinking what the goals are. So what's the purpose of this? What do we want to achieve? For some young children, for example, technology can provide a way to entertain themselves, which is, great for parents who are trying to do a Zoom webinar or need to cook dinner or whatever. But for other people, it might be about making kind of social connections for, I don't know, teenagers or young adults. And so, you need to choose the technology for the goal that you have in mind.
Yeah, that's really useful. Again, and one thing that's is coming up quite a lot at the moment, we've had a few questions about, is that we're all moving towards doing this, right? Which is talking over Zoom, and we've met before in person, and it's different, isn't it? Doing this, and someone from the audience has basically asked, sort of making this point, they feel that during virtual face-to-face interaction that they can misinterpret things, and it can take them a little bit longer to process different types of information, in the same way that some people have difficulties with phone calls. Do you have any ideas or solutions or ways to manage that?
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting phenomenon, isn't it? The way that we're all having to manage our social interactions in new ways. And I suppose that one of the challenges is, especially for autistic people who've spent maybe a lifetime honing these skills for managing face-to-face interactions, and then the carpet is just pulled out from under your feet and you feel like you're starting again. I mean, it's very intimidating. At the same time, I think that all of us, I'm not autistic myself, and I'm finding these interactions really difficult and challenging in new ways. And so I hope for that reason just generally as a community, we might all start to become a little bit more sympathetic and empathetic to other people's experiences because of the way that we're having to deal with social interactions at the moment, because we haven't got the information sources that we used to rely on, because we're not sure when it's our turn to speak in a group meeting and so on. So one thing I really hope is that we'll all just become a little bit more patient with each other and a little bit more generous in terms of our expectations. But for now, I suppose the goal is maybe to recreate the systems that were working for you previously. So if the visual information that you're getting through a video call is not working in the way that visual information was working when you were in the same room as someone, you know, do you need your camera on? Could you ask the person you're talking to turn their camera off? Could you switch to a text chat? You know, just because Zoom is set up as a video calling software, and because, you know, there's a sort of assumption that normally we meet face to face, and so we should be trying to recreate that as closely as possible, but actually it's not the same. And so maybe what we need to do is have, you know, a text conversation or a kind of live web chat or an email exchange. And that is, an email exchange now is exactly the same as an email exchange used to be. And so maybe that's safer ground to be on.
Yeah, no, that's really, really helpful. And it's definitely is a big change for all of us. And I think one of the weird things about this is that we're having a face-to-face conversation in a way, but actually there's like a whole context to what to your room and to my room. And so, for example, I keep looking over here because I'm looking at the questions that are coming in, and that's confusing, right? That creates all sorts of confusion. And I think for me, the other key thing is just realizing that on Zoom it's okay to say I need a bit of time as well, in the same way that you do in person. So I guess this follows on nicely to another question, which is again around this sort of video conferencing line. We know that a lot of services are moving towards this digital approach and this sort of video conferencing approach for things like assessment and providing ongoing support for people using phone, text, Skype, these different types of technology. And the feedback we get is mixed, to be honest with you. Some people really like it and some people find it really difficult. And we've got a question from a professional saying, you know, do they have any advice for how we can go around offering these assessments to support our sort of diagnostic assessments or ongoing support using things like phones and text and Skype?
Yeah, I mean, I think thinking about the long term, if we develop skills for making kind of remote assessments or consultations or whatever available, then the ideal thing would be that you would retain that as an option, but also have the face-to-face options. And then you just have more, just a wider range of ways that people can engage with a service, right? So, you know, we've got GP surgeries doing video calls and text message reminders for people. And lots of my psychiatry colleagues have been finding it really successful doing video-based consultations with their clients, you know, because normally in a face-to-face clinic, they'd have lots of people who just wouldn't make it in that day, and it's easier for them to be able to do it from home. So there's definite benefits, but the key thing is that this won't work for everyone, and what we really need is to have choice and flexibility in the future. And right now we don't have choice and flexibility, but we will one day. So I guess what I'm saying is these kinds of remote consultation methods won't work for everyone. And it's not about saying, oh, this is an upgrade on the way things used to happen. It's that this is a new option that we should retain in the long term for the people who find it beneficial, but not at the expense of reintroducing the face-to-face working that we used to be doing. In the short term, I think it's a little bit like what I was saying to the previous question. You know, you need to think about what are the range of ways that you can use the technology that you've got to maximize the benefit for people. So it doesn't have to be a video call. You know, could it be a live chat going backwards and forwards? Are there other ways to use technology to engage with people? So we need to be kind of imaginative about that and take a moment to reflect during a consultation, you know, maybe 10 minutes in and say, how is this working for you? Is there anything I can change? Is this bright light spot behind me too distracting? Is there a little bit of echo on my microphone? You know, just making sure that we reflect on those things and make the adjustments that we can to maximize benefit.
Yeah, I think that's really useful advice. And I think what you're saying there really chimes with what we've been hearing as well, is that you just need you need that personalization. There is not a rule for this that will apply to everyone. So we have another question coming in here, which is looking at the question of consistency in terms of technology use between school and home for autistic children. So how important do you think that consistency is in that regard?
Yeah, I think this is an advantage, and that we have right now, and I'm slightly reluctant to say this because I certainly don't want anyone listening to think, oh great, lockdown is a chance for self-improvement, because that's not at all how I feel we should be approaching the situation. But one of the biggest challenges is consistency between home and school. And I think that is a big reason why lots of technology-based supports, but also all sorts of other approaches, kind of struggle to have the maximum possible benefit. So communication support is a classic one. You know, ideally a speech and language therapist would be able to implement exactly the same communication supports in the home as they do in the school, but the fact is that's just really, really hard to achieve. You know, it's not the same people doing that support. And so now if young people are at home and they're not going into school, there is a chance at least for consistency, and I think that could be really valuable. So to make it slightly more concrete, for example, if you're using a kind of voice output communication app like Proloquo2Go or one of the other ones, then it's really, really useful if when you make a request, you actually get the thing that you've requested, because otherwise, how are you going to learn that producing that kind of communication has a kind of cause and effect relationship with the world? And in schools, it can be really hard to honor children's requests, because if it's not snack time, you can't have a snack, or if it's not playtime, you can't go out and play. But at home, we might have a little bit more capacity to do that, with obvious limitations, right? So you can't request to go to the beach right now, or you can't request to see your best friend from 2 streets over. So, you know, I recognize that won't always work out, but I think, yeah, consistency is maybe one of the things that we can do a bit better now than normal.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. We've got well, actually, I'll come to a question that actually I have right now, which is that I guess one of the real challenges with this, and you touched on it earlier, is how do we know something's got an evidence base? How much does that matter? Like, so if you're a parent and you see that there is this app for autism, or you know, a tool that says that they help people with a specific skill, how much does it matter that there's a randomized control trial? What matters here in terms of understanding if something's useful?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it doesn't matter if there's not a randomized controlled trial. And the reason why it doesn't matter is because there won't be a randomized controlled trial. And if we set that as our bar for evidence, then none of us will use anything ever. Apps come out too fast, and you know, and are used and fall by the wayside, and people move on, and we just can't be evaluating in them in that sort of way. With the beta project, the 3 domains that we thought were relevant was the reliability of the technology. So if it's going to crash a lot, or if it's going to keep interrupting what it does with adverts or demands for, you know, pay 99p to have access to this extra little thing, or if it's only available on Android devices and you've got Apple devices, or the other way around, right? These are really, really basic things, and they have to work before you can even think about, you know, anything beyond that. So that's the first bit of evidence that you need, is to find out, is there good evidence out there that this technology is a reliable piece of technology? And, you know, that might be about looking at the specifications of the tech itself and comparing them with what you've got available in terms of hardware. It might be looking at user reviews and so on. The next thing is whether it's motivating and engaging. So if you get it, are you actually going to want to use it, or is the person that you've bought it for going to want to use it? Has it got nice visuals and nice colors? Has it got nice sounds? Is it easy to navigate? Do the menus make sense to you, and so on? And again, there's a whole different set of evidence that you might be looking for in order to make that judgment. And that includes things like user-centered design. So did the people who make it involve autistic people in the design process? Can you find evidence that that has happened? And then you get to the third level, which is, will it actually do what you want it to do? So in the case of communication support, is it actually going to produce more vocabulary or you know, more requesting or whatever you're looking for? Or in the case of an autistic adult who's struggling to keep on top of their domestic chores, is it going to actually help you organize your chores list and get things done on a regular basis? And there's a whole different set of evidence, and that's where a randomized control trial might be relevant if there was one, but often it won't be done, and you'll still be looking at sources of evidence like you know, user reviews and the kind of testing process that the app developers themselves went through before it was released.
Yeah, no, that's a really nice way of sort of structuring it and thinking about it. So one of the questions that came in here, I think this might be slightly putting you on the spot, so don't worry if you don't know the answer to this. Yeah. But I guess one thing that people are concerned about is this idea that there's blue light in things like smartphones that cause sleep problems. Do you know anything around what the evidence base is for that?
Yeah, so I think the evidence base is shifting a little bit. So that I used to say that there was sort of fairly good evidence that blue light wasn't great for you, especially in the evenings, right? Now I think there's been a more recent, like I think there was a pretty big paper that came out in 2019 that was sort of saying, maybe this effect isn't as big of a deal as we thought. So in other words, looking at a screen just from a kind of simple, like, you know, vision perspective in terms of the light that's going into your eyes is not necessarily disrupting sleep. But I think there are still reasons why it can be useful to not have a lot of bright light shining in, like it's just a very awakey kind of thing to be doing at a time of day when you may be thinking about moving into, you know, thinking about falling asleep, right? So I think that is still a factor. And I think the other factor is not really to do with the blue light, but just the kind of information stream, you know? So I think most people benefit from a bit of a buffer zone between, you know, a social interaction or, you know, watching the news or something and going to bed, right? And the problem with technology in that space is that it's maybe kind of eliminating that buffer zone, and it's just hard to fall asleep if you've just been reading, you know, a whole load of scary pandemic headlines or having a chat with your best friend about how she's just broken up with her girlfriend and is really traumatized or whatever. You know, these things are just not great bedtime things. So I guess I'm saying, regardless of the blue light, I still think maybe technology immediately before you go to bed is not optimal.
Yeah, that all makes perfect sense to me. So we're almost out of time here. I'm just going to say there's a couple of things that came out that we'll try and deal with afterwards. And so in particular, some people are asking for advice on where we can share some research and the idea that screen time and the link between autism and screen time is a myth. We'll do what we can to get that to you after the event, and also some good advice about websites that are available to keep autistic people safe online as well. We'll have a think about that as well and come back to you. So I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone for all of your excellent questions, and to also please complete the survey so we can get feedback as soon as we can, and join, please also look at Discover as well to find out about future webinars and coronavirus content. For us as a charity, it's been really fantastic. This to be sharing this information and to get the feedback that we have. It's involved a huge change for us, but it's part of what we hope to do more of as a charity, which is to try and take the research evidence that we have and try and share its information and make it as useful as possible. Like all charities right now, we're going through a very, very difficult period, and we feel that this is a huge crossroads in time for just us as a charity and autistic people more generally. So, you know, if you are able to support us in any way by making a small donation, even just £5 to support these webinars and what we're doing, we'd really appreciate it. But finally, and most importantly, thank you, Sue, for joining us and for your excellent webinar and responses to such a wide range of questions. And a huge thank you to everyone who's joined us online. I hope you have a lovely weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.